All the trophies of the earth, the empty praise I think that I deserve. Lord, I come to you and I confess, nothing I desire compares. All is lost, all is lost in the shadow of the cross. Everything will fade.
Welcome to Loving the World Online.
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 Welcome to Loving the World Online. We're so glad that you're joining us for church today. We're going to begin with a walk down a city street, a really, really ancient city, Istanbul. We're going to be reading Psalm 36. The psalmist reaches out to God, noticing him in the world around him, pleading for God's help in his life. You can hear in the background seagulls like flying over the river. And you can hear in their plea the same plea in our voices. God, could you hear us? God, could you help us? God, can you save us? Psalm 36.
Welcome to Loving the World Online. Would you sing along with us this morning? Great is thy faithfulness. Great is thy faithfulness, O God, my Father. There is no shadow of turning with thee. Thou changest not, thy compassions, they fail not. As thou hast been, thou forever wilt be. this Lord's Prayer with me as Jesus taught us to pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. And give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever and ever. Amen.
Today I launch a 4-week series, Empty or Full. What are you empty of? And what are you filled with are two of the most important spiritual questions. As you come to own the attitudes, opinions, habits, and possessions of your life, you begin to see the places that God needs to go to work pruning or emptying your life, so that there is room for the qualities, fruit, and behaviors that reflect your participation and dependence on God's kingdoms. We all need a bilge pump and a gas pump. I grew up in a house where I was taught to think through the skill of arguing. I was encouraged to contradict, to sharpen my mind through the playful banter of disagreement. I remember my dad talking about seeing the world through someone else's eyes, walking in their shoes. He was talking about the pain he felt as a Vietnam vet when someone who had never had to face war judged our soldiers harshly. He talks a lot about listening to others' stories. This chart could be a description of a conversation at my home. Everyone picks a side and defends it. Half full, half empty. I love the last one. I'm with the artist. It's a great place to wash your brushes. Linguists assert that this question, is the glass half full or half empty, appeared first in a mathematics textbook in 1927. These next 4 weeks are an exploration of the empty or full question begun so long ago. Maybe during these next 4 weeks, you could get a glass and place it on a table near you, and then let it help you silently meditate through the week. God, what do I need to empty out? God, what do I need to be filled with? I was thinking of the bravery that will be required for individuals in our culture to practice the spiritual art of emptiness, of saying no to self and yes to God. As I was preparing this week, I came across a story from the early Texas history. Before we were a state, before we were a republic, we were a province of Mexico. Spanish law ordered the society. There was no freedom of religion. In that mixture, a few Jewish believers arrived. In order to survive the culture, they had publicly become Catholic because the penalty for practicing their Jewish faith was to be burned at the stake by the Inquisition. Still, couples would solemnize their marriage by a written contract in the presence of their families and friends in accordance with Jewish law. Then the couple would have a public Catholic ceremony. Later, when a rabbi was available, he would repeat the marriage ceremony. The private wedding would be a carefully guarded secret. Would you be willing to risk your life to feel right with God? Are you ready to give into the culture completely? I'm not saying that we have to abandon our culture and live like hermits or the Amish, but I am saying that if we as Christians do not change our thinking, then we will have been converted from our faith and be functional atheists of our culture. In our personal relationships, Christians look just like the world. We have as many divorces, as many criminals, as much discontent. In fact, in every major study I can find, the difference between Christians and non-Christians is hard to measure. Well, that's not exactly true. In a well-researched, reliable book published at the end of July, the historian and pollster Robert Jones asserts, the more racist attitudes a person holds, the more likely he or she is to identify as a white Christian. The only measurable distinction between Christians and non-Christians is racism. It's discouraging. We do not look like a people ready to die for our Savior and his profound love for the world. We do not look like people taking up the cross. We do not look like the inheritors of the Abraham job to bless the nations. It's time for a good, hard look at ourselves. It's time for emptying and filling. I've come to Stone Oak Ranch, just outside of Murchison. It's a wedding venue. People come here to celebrate love and make vows. I've been here to watch, to officiate, and congratulate. I like the entrance. The stone and iron make a formidable impression on you as you arrive. It says that beyond these gates, the things we're going to do are serious, they're real. We intend for them to stand up under the pressure of time and circumstance. Even the name exudes stability and strength. Stone, oak. These oak trees have stood here as silent sentinels, listening to the people gathered beneath their outstretched arms. People have been doing business under the trees from the beginning of time. They're the markers of the spiritual geography of the Holy Land. It all started in the trees in the garden. Our passage today is a one another passage. These passages fill the Bible, describing the boundaries of our human relationships. We are to love one another, live in harmony with one another, welcome one another, instruct one another, greet one another, wait for one another, comfort one another, bear with one another, be kind to one another, forgive one another, encourage one another, do good to one another, serve one another. Paul saw the new Jesus community as a way of life that was so different from the world's former ways. Jesus was leading us back to the garden, back to the trees, back to the way it was in the beginning when we were formed in the original community. It was a community untouched by sin and derived from the mutual benefit of relationships. Jesus is trying to get us to a life as if we belong to his world and not this world. The broken, fallen mess of a world. If we could just go back in time. I've come to a wedding venue to talk about human relationships. The passage we're going to look at is primarily addressed to husbands and wives, but it has deep implications for all human relationships because it teaches us a new way at looking at one another. As I started to prepare my sermon, I began asking myself about the history of marriage in Henderson County. And that's when I came across the search for the lost marriage book of Henderson County. For years, the book was lost. For over 40 years, historians searched for it. It's the earliest written record of people who got married here. In 1929, J.J. Falk wrote a history of Henderson County and told of the first marriage, September 23rd, 1846, of Joseph Key and Della Manning. He knew that because he had the book. We had his history, but not the book. When it was finally rediscovered in the 1980s in a pasteboard box in the corner of the courthouse basement, the book contained a note written in 1929 by J.J. Falk. These old books are very valuable as historic relics. They ought to be rebound and securely locked in a vault. These are the originals. I hope the Commissioner's Court someday will look after these old handmarks of our fathers. The court pays no attention to me. They were junked when I found them. The note was updated in 1939 by J.M. Boulding that the documents were still in danger, and then again in 1941 by John Chambers, and then not seen again for more than 40 years. We recorded commitments in that book. When the settlers immigrated from the U.S., Texas was part of Mexico, and the settlers did not have the right to marry. The government could not perform any marriages, nor judges, nor the justice of the peace. Only a Catholic priest was authorized to perform weddings, and then only among Catholic believers. No other marriages were legal in Texas. In typical fashion, Texans created their own form of marriage. You did not ask anyone for permission to marry. Instead, you declared your intentions to be married. You stood up in front of others and claimed your right to be married, and then you put up some money as a surety bond. You promised that if you ever had a chance to get married the official way, then you would, or you would lose the money. We called it marriage by bond. If I don't keep my word, then it will cost me. When Texas won independence from Mexico at San Jacinto, one of the first things the newly elected Congress did was make all of those marriages legal and valid. They did not have to do anything else. A man or a woman's word is what makes them married. It's not me, a preacher. It's not the government. It's not the book. It's not the paper. It's the commitment that is witnessed by others. It's the claim. It's the heart and the will. The commitments we make to each other grow out of inner decisions. No amount of rules or laws can ever substitute for the voluntary choices an individual makes and how they treat, honor, and respect others. Listen to Ephesians 5:21-33.
Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ.
Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord.
For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Savior.
Now as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything.
Husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word,
and to present her to himself as a radiant church, without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless.
In the same way, husbands ought to love their wives as they love their own bodies. For a man who loves his wife actually shows love for himself.
For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church, because we are members of his body.
For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh.
This is a profound mystery, but I'm talking about Christ and the church.
However, each one of you also must love his wife as he loves himself.
And the wife must respect her husband. This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
On May 1st, 1883, the Dallas Daily Herald reported on the wedding of Tom Jones, 21, and Miss H.P. Plummer, 17. Tom was the chief clerk of the General Land Office in Austin, but he had been raised here in Athens. He left Athens to head for Dallas with his mother, his brother, and sister-in-law, and Hubert Jones, the Henderson County attorney. 2 days later, the St. Matthew's Episcopal Wedding Register records their marriage, saying that a large company attended. The paper reported, Mr. Jones is not only handsome, but agreeable, and marries one of the most beautiful of Dallas maidens. What was running through Tom's mind? What did it mean that he was agreeable? He was expected to earn a living and support his wife. He was young. Did they make it? What about Miss H.P. Plummer, 17 years old and launching into this man's arms? Was it a wise choice? Did she marry for love, looks, or longevity? Marriage then is not what it is now. When she got married, she was giving up the right to own property. She did not have the right to vote. She stepped out of one shadow and into another. We find them in the 1900 census living here in Athens. He's a confectioner. She's had 4 children, but only one of them survived childhood. Here is the spot. This is where couples stand and step into a marriage. Beneath these trees, between oak and iron, it's here that I want to talk about the most powerful word in the English language that defines human relationships: submission. It's a distasteful word in our culture. It is almost always connected to bullying, power, and manipulation. It has been used to keep people in bondage, to deny women their voices and their rights, to excuse abuse and install fear. Men have been taught that to submit is weak. We, as Christians, have to relearn the word and then live the word. The Greek word is hypotasso, It's made of two words, hypo, which means under, and tasso, which means to place under. We are to place ourselves under others. Almost no one wants to be submissive. No one wants to be weak. No one wants to be quiet. No one wants to yield. But our spiritual future depends on us learning and mastering the art of submission. First, we have to understand that Paul is not talking about power and authority here. He's not talking about demanding obedience. He's not involved in a power trip. He's describing the relationship that Jesus has with the people he loves. This word and this passage is about emptying ourselves so that we might be in relationship with others. It's set in the historical context of Roman relationships in the early first century. It's first about seeing the person you are marrying. In Roman society, marriages were business arrangements. Men and women lived separate and disconnected lives. The expectations we have for companionship and friendship in marriage were not major concerns. Instead, it was the running of a household, raising and training an heir, and the work of daily survival. It was easy for men and women to see each other as a means to an end. Many missed out on the garden of mutuality. Paul wants them to walk back to the garden. Here is perhaps the most important sentence ever written about marriage. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. People want to rush on past this verse, but we need to hold on to it. When Paul wrote these words, he shattered thousands of years of human history. He was challenging the habits and understanding of his day. He was going up against a male-dominant society that we can't even dream of. He was advocating the radical reshaping of human relationships around Jesus. So much of what we read in the Bible is about our relationship with God and how Jesus makes that possible, being restored to right relationship with God. But here, Paul shifts and says that Jesus also wants us to remake our human relationships. He wants to take us back to the garden. If you back up just a bit, he's made the argument that we've been selected in creation. We were selected with a purpose on the earth to do good works. Paul argues that to live out our creation calling is to live in the light of God's love. If you want to master human relationships, you need to master yourself. Too often, we're trying to change others, point out the flaws in others. Paul has no interest in this way of thinking. Instead, Paul is trying to drive us back to the creation, back to the intention, back to the reason God made us and placed us in the world. To submit yourself in a relationship is to voluntarily give up power, to give up selfish desires, to give up control, and instead seek to understand another, seek to listen, seek to walk together in the quiet of the garden. We are to seek to find one another, to discover one another, and to serve one another.
I'm Jaime Cortez, Community Pastor, and at this time, we want to take 1 minute to pray together. So wherever you are, if it's in your living room, if it's in your car, we want to invite you to take 1 minute to pray out loud. We want to pray for our leaders, we want to pray for the church, and we want to pray for the sick during this time. So take 1 minute and pray.
On December 20th, 1882, the Galveston Daily News reported a wedding in Athens between Mr. Charles T. Bonner of Tyler and Miss Frankie Murchison of Athens. Charles was the son of Judge Bonner, who was also the lead attorney of the Texas and St. Louis Railway. Miss Frankie Murchison was the daughter of Colonel Murchison of Athens, Texas. After the wedding, the railway company brought a special train to town, consisting of 3 fine palace cars, beautifully decorated, to bring the bridal party to Tyler, where they attended a reception given to them by Judge Bonner. I bet Miss Frankie Murchison Bonner and her new husband Charles felt like $1 million, standing on the back of that train, waving to the crowd as it pulled away from the Athens station. Paul knows that he has 2 distinct audiences of this charge: submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. He has to appeal to wives and husbands. This is the bride's dressing area. Behind this door, she and her attendants help her put on the dress. I listened to a great podcast this week about the history and meaning of the wedding dress. You should check it out in my sermon notes. When Queen Victoria got married in 1840, she wore a white dress covered in lace. It was considered an unusual choice. 15 years later, when photography became possible, the wedding party gathered for a reenactment. Those pictures traveled around the world, probably the most important wedding pictures ever taken. They continue to shape the choices women make in selecting a dress. For some reason, we step back in time. There's something we want to capture of those earlier moments. Miss Frankie Murchison was being asked to take a step back to the garden. The language used here to talk to the wife is the language of the creation. Paul wants women to look at men like Eve looked at Adam in the garden, before he was a wreck, before his sin. Could you see him again like God sees him? Confident, creative, tender and caring for the garden, a partial reflection of God. The way we used head for power, force, authoritarianism is not the way Paul was using it. He was trying to remind the women that once there was a time that the man lived out the relationship and love of God, and that is the moment that God created Eve. Not to be a servant, not to be the object of some ego trip, but because he was incomplete, alone, and in need of a partner. This is the basis for all human community, not just marriages. God created us to be together, to see each other, and to see God in each other. Paul says to the wife, can you look at your husband and set aside for a moment what you think and what you want? Can you not judge him by his looks or his job, but as God's partner? Can you see him doing this amazing thing in the world of caring for it and trying to make it better? If you can see him that way even for a moment, then you'll know that your relationship is not first and foremost about you, but about what God creates for the world. Paul's words here should never be used to prop up a man's ego. They should never be used to excuse a man who is abusing or denigrating a woman. For too long, these words have been used as a way to injure women, but these words were never meant to destroy, but to build. Paul clarifies the words at the end. The wife must respect her husband. The word respect is the word phobetai, to stand in awe. This is the gaze of grace. No man deserves it. It's not because he's handsome. It's because he was handmade. It's not because of what he has made of himself, but because in that moment a woman sees that this man is clay, filled with the presence and the image of God. And we can do this for our spouses or our friends. If you can see them at their best, then you can call them back into the garden where they might walk with God as a friend. And wouldn't that make your life and their life better?
Rodeando estoy, pensé que caerían hoy, mas nunca me has fallado, Dios. change to come, knowing the battle's won, for you have never failed me yet. En ti confiaré, tu promesa sigue en pie, tú eres fiel. Confiado andaré, en tus manos estaré, siempre has sido fiel. And I know the night won't last, your word will come to pass, and my heart will sing your praise again. Cristo mi Salvador, cúbreme con tu amor, mi corazón te alabará. The promise still stands, great is your faithfulness, your faithfulness. I'm still in your hands, this is my confidence, you never fail me yet. En ti confiaré, tu promesa sigue en pie, tú eres fiel. Confiado andaré, en tus manos estaré, siempre has sido fiel. Oh, you never failed me yet. I see you move, come move the mountains, and I believe. I see you do it again. You made a way where there was no way, and I believe. I see you do it again. You sé que tú mueves montañas, yo creo en ti. Sé que lo harás otra vez. Abriste el mar en el desierto, yo creo en ti. Sé que lo harás otra vez. I see you through, moving the mountains, and I believe. I see you do it again. Abriste el mar where there was no way, and I believe. I see you do it again. Sé que lo harás otra vez. I see you do it. I see you do it again. En ti confiaré, tu promesa sigue en pie, tú eres fiel. Confiado andaré, en tus manos estaré, eres fiel. Your promise still stands, great is your faithfulness, faithfulness.
On November 17, 1883, the Memphis Daily Appeal reported on some events in Athens, Texas. Apparently, the young men were complaining that the widowers have consumed the crop of marriageable girls. Several married men are living with their fourth, some with their third, and a majority with their second wives. That next spring, on April 24, 1884, the Weekly Chillicothe Crisis from Missouri reported that Athens, Texas has 55 young men and only 8 young ladies. The paper further recommended some of the eastern cities should form a woman's immigration society and send out a supply of superfluous young ladies. When I read the word superfluous, it really stung. It stung because far too long men have looked at women and made them objects to be talked about, to be looked at, to be owned and controlled, like commodities that can be traded. 20 years later, the attitude had not changed much when the paper from Shreveport reported on August 11, 1910, of Cy Carson's hunt for a wife. The paper reported that Cy, from Brownsboro, wrote to the postmaster, "Dear sir, if there be any woman there advertising for men, please let them know about me, and tell them to send their picture so I can see them and see if I can pick out one that will suit me." Paul says to men, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. And then he goes on to expand on that idea. The goal of the new creation in Christ is for us to renew the world. It's not about me owning someone or finding someone to command. It's not about me demanding submission. Whenever I read the words reserved for the wife, I take my eyes off the words that pierce my own soul. The list for husbands is breathtaking. Love your wife. Love her like Jesus loved the church, remembering that he died on the cross for the church. Remember what Jesus was doing. He was building up the church. Are you building up your wife? Remember that Jesus saw what no one else saw. He made fishermen into leaders. He made the greedy into givers. He made the fighters into peacemakers. Remember that Jesus saw everyone through the lens of the Word of God, not the Word of man. Jesus sees you. Jesus sees me like we are back in the garden, new, created, beautiful. Husband, he evokes the second great commandment, love your neighbor as yourself. If there's ever a moment that your wife feels second, it's because you are living out of your sinful nature and not out of your redeemed nature. But these verses have been used for nearly 2,000 years to hurt women is clear from all the research. They were not following the Jesus example. We know how Jesus treated women. He cherished them when no one else did. He lifted them up the discouraged. He included them in the intellectual and emotional debates of his ministry. He depended upon them for advice and support. He befriended them. He entrusted them with the most important news of the world, the story of the resurrection, and he sent them out to tell it. He broke new ground. I love this whole truck. It's picturesque. It's nostalgic. I can see why people might want their picture taken with it. Some nostalgia is a good thing. Some nostalgia, however, is dangerous. Too many people are ready to hurry backwards to a time when men were strong and bossed others around. It was destructive then, and it's destructive now. God is not calling men backwards, but forward. He said that God is calling us into a relationship with our wives that so reminds people of the love of Jesus for the church, that others will be drawn into the love of Christ. If someone could look at the way you treat women, and especially your wife, and be turned away from the Lord, then you're doing it wrong. Welcome to our Yellow Chair interview. I'm interviewing Alessandro Flores. He goes by the name Junior, and he's our new friend. And we have this amazing story that's been going on over the last few months that we want to tell you about today. Junior, thank you so much for coming and joining us today.
It's good to be here.
Could you introduce yourself to a bunch of people maybe that are meeting you for the first time today? Tell us about yourself.
So, like you said, my full name is Alessandro Flores Jr. Most people have a difficulty saying that. So on my professional side of my life, most people here in Athens know me by Eli. And,
Oh, wow.
Junior comes about to where, born and raised in church. I take my father's name, so that's where Junior comes about
Okay,
as well.
right. So tell us about your family. Tell us about what you do here in Athens.
I moved up here in Athens in 2008 and met my wife here. We were married in 2011. I'm a title abstractor here with Henderson County Title, Colonial Title, same company. So that's pretty much of what I do here. In
That's
Athens.
awesome. That's great. Do you have any children?
No children at the time.
Okay. Well, we are so glad that you've joined us here today. Now, the story that I want you to tell is a little bit about what's happened during COVID these last 4 or 5 months between Casa de Gracias and our bilingual ministry. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, actually, Casa de Gracia got its self started in 2009. We were Iglesia Bautista Emanuel. And about a year ago, we felt the Lord was leading us in a different direction. And we made a lot of structural changes, which hence came the name Casa de Gracia. But what most importantly, we made a lot of spiritual, spiritual changes in our lives. And we felt like God was leading us in a different direction. So we started in prayer, our leadership team, our members of the church praying, so God could give us that direction.
Yeah.
And who would have known, out of COVID,
Right.
we were able to meet, your bilingual ministry here at First Baptist Church. And some of us knew each other from the past, and it's like we've never, been separated. We've always been together. And we feel like this is the direction that God is leading us. And
So we sense that God is leading all of us together to become one thing. So like our bilingual ministry, we all are just one thing. And now Casa de Gracias feels like they want to come and join and be part of that one thing together, the thing that God's creating. As we say sometimes FMSA, which is this new kind of hybrid model where we're all working and trying to find a way to do it together. And we're really excited about that. And so pretty soon, it looks like maybe on the 20th, all the members of Casa de Gracias are going to come and officially join, and we're going to become that one thing.
Yes.
Which is really exciting. Now, to make that all happen, though, y'all are having to make some choices that are a little complicated because you've really invested in a piece of property and a church and a facility and all of that. And so you're kind of laying some of that down. So can you talk about that spiritual journey of laying down power?
Well, like I said, about a year and a half ago, we all made the decision in our own lives to put ourselves in submission to what God wanted to do in our lives, and not just with our congregation, but in our lives personally. And this is when you feel something's God, is God sent. It's very easy to submit yourself to His will, because you know that in the long run, the outcome, no matter whether we have to deal with, what are we going to do with our property, what's going to happen with everything, material wise is second, because we know that God has something greater for us, and we've always aspired to make an impact here in the town of Athens, and we feel that this is the opportunity that the Lord is giving us to be able to make that impact here in Athens.
And so when we started meeting and talking about this, one of the things we talked about is that what we've been praying. We've been praying so hard that God was going to provide some worship leadership that we just desperately needed. And we tried several things that we could never we just could never solve it. And then your worship team found Juan, the preacher, and y'all's need just met together.
Correct.
And it just feels like that God prepared us for each other.
Correct.
In my sermon today, I'm talking about men and women and husbands and wives, and there's that same sense in there that God made us for each other, that we meet a need in each other. And, we believe that Casa de Gracias meets a need and an answer to prayer to us, too. So in the process of coming together, one of the things is y'all have a building, and you still owed money on the building. So can you tell us about where that process is now?
Well, that's another way that we can see God working in all this in all that's happening right now. This time is we've been able to get in contact with the church that we got the property from, we were still making, monthly payments on the purchase of the building, and it comes about that we've been able to contact them, and they're willing to forego the rest of the balance that's owed on the building. And it's a significant amount, so it's not something that we're talking about. That's something that's a small amount, but just to see God move in that way is just confirmation again that He's moving in all that's happening.
Because
now.
our leadership team was preparing to go to the church and asked to try to raise the money to try to partner with you to pay off that amount, and then God just says, "Oh no, we're just going to wipe that all away." So it's just an amazing thing that God's doing in our midst. And we're so glad, and I can't wait for more people to get to know you in our congregation, that we all get to be one. So on the 27th, when we all come back together again, we're going to try to have a unified service where everybody's together. Even maybe with Mass, we'll be able to see each other.
Right.
But we have a lot of days ahead. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
In 1883, an incident happened in Brownsboro. John Hatton went to see his uncle, Mr. Van Alstyne. Hatton was the constable of precinct number 4. Constable Hatton had gone to see his cousin, John Van Alstyne. John had abused his wife. An argument started. Mr. Van Alstyne attacked his nephew, and in the ensuing fight was killed. It was ruled self-defense. Constable Hatton lived in the area until 1946, being remembered as coming to the aid of an abused woman. There's not even the hint in the life of Jesus that he abused any of the people around him, not even those who were going to do him harm. This is the model we are given for human relationships. We are called to live in a mystery. That the strongest, most powerful leader of the world laid down his life, that he emptied himself of power, and in so doing transformed all of us. Now we are called to do no less. We are called to serve one another in love, not for our own good, but for the good of the other. The Athens Weekly reported on February the 1st, 1901, the marriage of Miss Mari Harwood Collins to Mr. William Alexander Brenham, Jr. William had worked at the Athens Review and was close to the editor. The editor said of the couple, "Miss Collins is one of the most charming young ladies we ever met, is highly accomplished, rare personal beauty, and is a vocalist of superior merit. Mr. Benham is a promising young businessman of Dallas. He possesses all the qualities of an honorable gentleman. The review extends heartiest congratulations and wishes the happy pair a life of unclouded bliss." Unclouded bliss. I love that. It's my favorite of all the wedding announcements I read this week, because it sees both the man and the woman through the eyes of generosity, grace, and love. It sees them at their very best. And that's what it means to submit to one another out of reverence to Christ. We're so glad that you joined us for worship today. We're not done yet. Hope you'll go to the next links tab on the website and go open that up. I have sermon links there. There's a couple of videos that you ought to go watch, some information that'd be really helpful in you unpacking the sermon today. There's a giving link. Our church really needs you to continue to give. You've been really faithful during this hard time. We thank you for doing that. There's a family activity, a way you can pour the Spirit of Christ into your children by walking side by side with them through the Bible. We'd love for you to do that. There's a fun matching game just for a chance to do something with your family right after the sermon, lots of times to talk about the sermon and things that were in it. There's the children's box. We'd love for you to pop that open and see what we discover each week when a kid puts a picture and sends it to me. There's worship music that our staff curates every week, a place that you can go for strength and encouragement. If you're watching this early, why don't you come down at 9:45 for Big Tent Worship just outside the Rock. Really safe, really spread out, really encouraging. just about 30 minutes, and then we're done. Now, our church is getting ready to open up. I'm filming this right before we're going to make that final decision, but I'm assuming that on September the 20th, we're going to start going into worship. It'll be a new experience for us. We're going to try in some different things. Let me tell you about a couple of them. At 8:30, 10:45, and 11, we'll be having worship. We'll have our 2 regular services and the bilingual service. All of our services will require masks. All of our services will require social distancing. We'll just about have half the seats marked off. We'll be having an additional space in the gymnasium for both our 8:30 and 10:45, so that we have lots of extra space. And sometimes families might prefer to be in the gym because they can have food, they could sit at a table, you could bring some stuff for the little kids, because we're not yet ready to have children's programmings during our services. We're hopeful to be able to do that, but what we're going to be needing is new volunteers, because most of our volunteers in those areas are in the high-risk category, and so they're not able to volunteer. So until we can get new volunteers, or until it feels safer, we won't be having children's programmings. So you can pray for the leadership team, pray for our staff as we're trying to get ready for all that. We hope that you'll join us on the 20th. It'll be like a homecoming day. It'll be a lot of fun. And now, wherever you are, why don't you stand up, and we'll leave with our motto. Would you say it with me?
Love God, live like Jesus, serve others.
Let's go.